Hello, and welcome to the Pillar Diaries, episode number 24, featuring Sister Sheila Lane. Happy Anniversary Pillar Diaries. For 2 years and counting, women have been speaking into and changing the fabric of our lives. The voices of these women still speak to me every day. In each season, I find myself hearing them again and again. I don't think it's a coincidence that Sister Lane is our anniversary speaker. Sister Lane attends the Promise Apostolic Church in Churchill, Tennessee, pastored by Brother Jonathan Lovelace. She and her husband of 30 years have 3 children. The Lanes have spoken into and helped strengthen the lives of many children throughout the years. The impact of their love on them could never be numbered. Sister Lane is a 3rd-generation apostolic. She has a rich heritage in the faith, and she herself will explain to you that this is the very rock and foundation that has carried her on in the sunshine and in the rain. Sister Sheila worked for Eastman for 23 years, and she has been involved in many ministry positions throughout the church over the years. But she says working with the 3rd and 4th graders has been her favorite. Sister Sheila states, so many of these children have stayed in church and are now telling their own children about the goodness of our God. She is part of a church women's book club where she has found some of her greatest friends and prayer warriors to help fight along her side. Her and her husband, for the last 15 years, have been coordinators for families who have adopted children from China. Each year, they host an event that serves around 400 people, where they get together and celebrate the culture, the heritage, the music, and the traditions of China. Sister Sheila had to come face to face with a question many, if not all of us as Christians have to face. The question of why. Why now? Why this? Why them? Why that? Why us? And why me? Listen to this pillar as she takes you on the journey to find the answer to her why. Even if it all points to why you, God isn't usually trying to tell you why you, but that this is for you. These women are our pillars, and their stories are our monuments. If we ever fail to tell their stories, what they have built will crumble. These are their diaries.
Hello, my name is Sheila Lane, and I go to the Promise Apostolic Church in Churchill, Tennessee. And I am a 3rd-generation apostolic. My papa, T.R. Benton, started one of the first apostolic churches in Kingsport in 1946. They had 4 sons who all worked alongside them in the ministry, and then my mom, Nadine, was the baby, and she also worked along with my mama and papa in the church. And then after papa retired, then my uncle Tommy Benton actually pastored that church another 40 years. And so I have a very rich apostolic heritage, and I have like a legacy of faith and a foundation. And little did I know how much I was going to need that foundation. So my very first memory is I was about maybe 3 or 4 years old, and we lived in Charleston, South Carolina. My daddy was in the Navy, and so we moved a lot when I was a kid. But my Uncle Jackie Benton had come down to visit, and I was sick. And I can remember just laying there. I probably had a fever, and nobody really knew what was wrong with me. And so my mom and my Uncle Jackie prayed for me. And then Jackie got his guitar out and he started singing, and he sung that song, The Answer's on the Way. It's an old song. The chorus goes, Jesus said it, I believe it, and it's so. Our Heavenly Father knows our needs before we pray, and you can rest assured the answer's on the way. And that's my very first memory of anything. And that set the tone, or the theme, really for my entire life. My whole family always totally believed every single problem could be answered in a prayer, with a prayer. And if we were sick when we were little or whatever, Mama's response to everything was, I'll put you in the prayer line at church. And that was just what we did. That's what she did. She believed it. Everybody believed it, and miracles happened. So that was really the beginning of my faith journey, in that So when we were with my mama and Papa Benton, everywhere we went, all over town, people would stop them, tell them their problems, and then they would just pray for them right there on the street or in the bank or at the grocery store or whatever. And that just was just like, I didn't know anything else. And so my parents wouldn't let me stay with anyone that wasn't, spend the night with anyone that wasn't related to me. So I was in the homes of my aunts and uncles and my cousins all the time. And they all lived that way. They, you know, they practiced what they were preaching, and I thought everybody did that. Like, I didn't know till I was grown that people didn't live like some people didn't live that way. But I was just surrounded by these people that had this unwavering faith. Everybody did. And so that was just a normal for me. That was just normal. You pray, God answers, facts. Like, that's it. And so that just carried me all the way through my childhood. That was just what we did. So when I was a senior in high school, I visited a church, it's a Baptist church, with a friend, and that's where I met the person that I married. And he was not raised in an apostolic church, but he was raised in a Christian home, and that was a wonderful church family and all that. And so when we got married, we made my church our home church. And so all of that was good. We had tons of friends, and we were all like in our early 20s. And so our friends started having children. And so I knew that I wanted to be a mom from the very beginning. Like, there was nothing else that I wanted. And that was always just, my mom babysat kids, and we always had kids in our home. I had a little brother, and I was just always with children. And so I always wanted to be a mom. And so lots of our friends were having kids, and so we just decided, we would too. That just seemed like, just what you did. And so I vividly remember it was maybe an August, September time frame. And I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I can tell everybody at Christmas if we're going to be pregnant, we're going to have a baby. And, honest to goodness, it never occurred to me that I would not be able to get pregnant. Like, it never occurred to me. And so by Christmas, I was crying because I wasn't pregnant. And I still remember that. Just, why? What? And so anyway, I did what I know to do. I just prayed. So I had this dream, and there was a little girl, and she had blonde curly hair, and she was reaching up for me, and she was calling me Mom. And I don't even know what that dream ever would have meant, but I can assure you that set the tone. I wanted a baby so bad, so bad. And so I just, I prayed and waited for the answer, and prayed and waited forever. And it just never occurred to me that I wouldn't be able to have a baby. Like, it didn't occur to me. And it also didn't occur to me that I couldn't get a prayer answered. That didn't occur to me either. And so, time goes on, and they say, doctors won't even talk to you till you've been trying for at least a year. Like, a year? That's a long time. I thought that was a long time. And so it felt like, that old song, the answer's on the way. It didn't feel like it was on the way at all. And so we started that journey towards trying to find out why, we couldn't have children, and did all that. There was absolutely nothing wrong with me. There was no answer. There was no reason, and there was no answer. And so sometimes it felt like, months turned into years. And so finally, it started feeling like this is not going to happen. People were having children. Our church was growing. Oh my goodness, like, it definitely was in the water fountain. I would have drank that water fountain. Like, it was like, don't drink in the water fountain. I'm like, I'm drinking out of that water fountain. And so what happened was, after a while, I started taking it very personal that I wasn't good enough to be a mother. Like, if somebody told me they were going to have a baby, I would immediately assess that person and go, okay, God, what is it about them that's so much better than me? Like, what is it that I'm not doing? So I took that rejection very, very personal. I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. I couldn't figure out why other people were blessed and I wasn't. And I would definitely assess every single person that told me that they were going to have a baby. And I felt like a failure, but I also felt like I was doing something wrong. Like, I couldn't figure it out. And so I would pray, and then I would just try to figure it out. Like, why is it that, what am I doing wrong? What is it? And so I would constantly compare myself to other people. And I would look at them, and then I would try to, model maybe what they were doing. And then you kind of evolve. I think the whole thing is just this evolution of life, I guess, or I don't know. But anyway, I was just, the rejection was brutal. I mean, I don't even know how to describe the rejection I felt from God. I mean, I've been rejected by other people, and the consequences of that rejection, or how do you deal with that, right? So my heart was broken. I had all these emotions, and every single month I was hopeful. I was very hopeful every month. And then I was excited, thinking of the expectation that I could be pregnant, and then the devastation that I wasn't. And so it was this cycle that I just couldn't get out of. I could not rise above that cycle. Every month it was just joyous. It was soul crushing, just over and over and over. And I couldn't figure out how to get out of it. I couldn't figure out why God wasn't answering my prayer, because that's what the model had always been. You pray, God answers your prayer. But so how do you live when He doesn't answer it? What do you do when He doesn't answer it? Where do you turn? Who do you turn to? So that whole foundation that I had, it's like there's nowhere else to go. This is it. There's no other answer. It has to be God, because there's nothing else. And so I didn't have anywhere else to go with that, and so we just stayed in the pocket, really, you know what I mean? And so, people will ask about this and about, medical intervention. And I think that's great. I think that is amazing if that's for you. If that's if that's where you're feeling led, I think all those things are wonderful. But I knew that it wasn't for me. I knew that would be just a waste of time, because I knew that if God intended for me to have a baby, then I would have one. I knew it. And I'm not saying it's wrong for other people, it was just wrong for me. And I knew it would be a waste of time, because I knew that this wasn't even hard. This was not even a hard thing for God to do this. As a matter of fact, this is how we're created. This is how we're designed. So how can it be hard? This is this is how we're created. And so I knew it wasn't hard. And so everybody had babies. Oh my goodness, everywhere I went, there were so many babies. And I actually was very, very blessed. Everyone shared their babies with me. And at church, we had a row full of kids. All the little kids would sit with us. And so we were just absolutely blessed with people that shared their children with us, and they know who they are. And so I did not want anybody feeling sorry for me. Forever. I did not have a pity party. There were very, very few people that knew the struggle. Not very many people at all. I just didn't want people feeling sorry for me. And so, but I can remember a memory. I was at the mall, and it was Christmas time. And all these people were in line with their little kids to see Santa at the mall. And I remember just coming around the corner, and there was this big long line, and all these kids, some were happy, some were not. And I just remember just sobbing because I didn't have a kid in that line. And I had to leave. I had to leave the mall. But I did all that internally. I did it all by myself. I didn't feel like I didn't share that with people, which I'm not sure. I guess everybody does it different, but that's just how I did it. So eventually, my marriage did fall apart, a lot of stress, and I never wanted to be divorced. So I did spend a lot of time sort of trying to assess the whole situation, like how I got to this place and how there was no grace for me. Like, I'll just have to say this, generally speaking, because it actually happened to me during this time. It seems like when people come into the church and maybe they've never been in church and they've lived in the depths of sin and they've had these hard lives, and they come into the church, and as a group and as a congregation, we just welcome them right in. We don't care what their sins are. We just go, it's okay, God's forgiven you. And it's like we extend this enormous amount of grace to people who come to the Lord late in life, or, you know, after they've been out in sin or never been in church. And we just welcome them in. This is just my experience. I'm not speaking for everybody. This is just for me, and this is the way I saw it. But it felt like, you know, I make one mistake, and man, we are never forgiven that. We're never forgetting it, and we're never forgiving it. And so that was harsh. I mean, that was really, really hard. I mean, how can that be? And I guess maybe one day I got a little sassy with Mama, and not my mom, she was very supportive, but I remember saying, well, the gate's not shut behind anybody yet. You know, we still got a lot of living to do before that gate shuts behind all these people. So I was a little bit, but it was during that time that I truly had to just strip down. Who is it exactly that I'm trying to please? And whose opinion really matters about me? And who gets to say who I am? Who gets to say that? And so I had to learn, you know, not to depend on other people's opinion of me. While I still like for people to think good things about me, at the end of the day, whose opinion really matters about me? And so I remember the scripture in John 8 where Jesus says of the accusers, if anyone's without sin, you cast the first stone. And so I did look around at the people who were saying things about me, making up things about me or whatever. And I'm like, nobody is sinless. No one. And so I did learn that. That was a very, very big lesson for me, is who gets to decide who I am and who am I trying to please? Because like I said, I'm a people pleaser. And so then the other scripture in that time, so this was a long time, is in Romans 8, who can separate me from the love of God? So I learned that people can't separate me from Him. People can think what they want to think and they can say what they want to say, but they can't separate me from God. And so, oddly, I am incredibly thankful for that experience. It was tough, but it changed everything. It changed who I was. It changed how I looked at people. It just changed me. And it was getting tried by fire, I guess, is what that was for. But anyway, so that was all, you know, by my late 20s, and I just had to figure out who I was, and I had to just focus on pleasing God, and the rest of the chips can just fall where they will. So in my journey to motherhood, so we're at a standstill now, like nothing's happening. And so nothing looked like it was in sight. But I was still young. I was in my 20s. I still had plenty of time. And so no worries, right? And so then Richard and I got together, and then about 4 years later, we got married. And so that I was 32. He's 5 years older than me, so he was 37. And so I don't remember us actually ever, I think we probably talked about that when we were dating, about having kids. And so I don't think we ever had like a start time. I mean, like, I don't think we ever did. We just thought it'll happen. And just, I could add, my ex did go on to get remarried, and he had 2 children. So I was happy for them, but still, so then we really felt like, okay, now I know where the problem is. So it was definitely me. And so Richard and I, we got married, and we got married on Valentine's Day. It was on a Monday, but it's still Valentine's Day. And so we had the next 2 years, we just had a great time. Life was good. Under all of that, though, I was still intensely wondering when I'm going to have a baby. And so I tried not to get back on the merry-go-round that I was on before, and I tried to be cool. Just relax, they say. And then when you go, I am relaxed, stop saying that. Please stop saying that. Everybody, please stop saying that. Can I just make a public announcement here? Stop saying that. You can edit that out if you want to. So again, we're still, trying to walk by faith. And so there was a question in that for me. How far can you walk in faith? How long can you go without an answer? So it's easy to walk with God when He's walking with you, and He's talking to you, and you're getting answers. It's so easy to walk that way. But when He's not, when you feel like you're still not getting the answers after all these years, how do you walk with Him when you don't hear Him? Okay, so gradually I stopped going to baby showers. Nobody wants somebody sitting through their baby shower crying the whole time. And so it's like you sit and cry through a baby shower. I don't want people feeling sorry for me. I'm going to go back to that again. I just was so determined not to share this struggle with people. And so I just didn't participate. I found the things that hurt the most, and then I just avoided those things. And so oddly, I quit going to church on Mother's Day. I never didn't attend church. I was always very, very faithful. I had my perfect attendance pins, all the way down. So for me not to go on Mother's Day was a big deal. And I'll just say this, going to church on Mother's Day when you want children desperately, that's rejection at the highest level. It doesn't get any worse than that. And so, nobody wants to sit there and hear about how blessed mothers are and, all that. And you're just sitting there looking around, all those moms, and you're not one of them. And so eventually I tried to focus on my own mom. People would say that, well, just focus on your own mom. I'm like, I have a great mom. And I did try to focus on her and how blessed I was and all the women in my life. And she was always so incredibly kind. She didn't really get it, but she understood. So I did try to focus on my own mother and how blessed I was to have her and how kind and understanding she was about the whole situation. She certainly didn't get it. She had never experienced that, but she did know that I was struggling, and she certainly was sympathetic to me, and she understood that I was trying. And she always bought me a flower basket for Mother's Day, and she always said it was because I had made her a mother. And so that was super sweet of her. And she, we got through it together, and she was always so gracious about that. So as we're going through life, and so I'd found the places where I avoided and tried to just, still I'm judging other people. I'm still not understanding, and maybe even almost 10 years has gone by in the waiting. And so the question for me was, what do you do in the waiting? What do you do when you're waiting for God to answer that big, long prayer, and He's not answering it? There's no answer on the way. My first memory of the answer's on the way, I'm thinking the answer is no. I'm thinking the answer is no. And so in the waiting, we decided that we love kids. We just loved kids. And so we started teaching a Wednesday night class, and they were 3rd and 4th graders, which are my favorite ages. And we loved it, loved those kids. And I made chocolate chip cookies every Wednesday night, and we played with those kids. We went to their parties, we went to their karate competitions, and we just did all the things. And we taught VBS, and we just had a wonderful, wonderful time, spent lots of years doing that. We volunteered Salvation Army, we fed homeless people, Richard was a big brother in that big brother, big sister organization. I don't even know if they still do that. We worked with the Angel Tree. We did Christmas distribution for children with the Salvation Army. And all of that, we were still playing with nieces and nephews and taking them on vacations. And we were just trying to figure out where we were in like what was our purpose and what were we supposed to be doing, and where was the answer? Like, I don't know, I just didn't understand that. I didn't understand what I was supposed to be doing. And I remember praying, God, if you are not gonna give me a baby, then just take the desire away, right? Like, why would I still be mourning this and wanting this so desperately and then not having it? I just didn't understand that. I truly didn't understand that. And so I had a dear friend who, she worked with me, and we worked together for years, and she was in the next cubicle from me forever. And she did know my struggle, and every I don't know, I would say every 3 or 4 months, she would come up to me and she'd say, Sheila, have you thought about adoption? And I would say, no, like, just no, quit saying that. And so I know now that God was using her to plant that seed for me. But I can tell you that was not an option. It was not an option. I wanted babies that looked like me and Richard, which maybe that would have been a little scary. But no, I just remember it wasn't an option. And I think back so many times how she, parted the water basically and dared to mention it to me again. And she would just say, well, maybe if you'd thought about adoption. And I just couldn't figure out why she wouldn't just stop saying that, because it was just not an option for me. And so I have learned this. One, adoption is not for everyone. I know that. I didn't know that before, but I know it now. And I also know that adoption is a journey. It's not something that you just do. It's something that, for me, I guess I should say, for me, it was a journey, and it's something that God truly had to prepare my heart for. It wasn't something that just, came, or it's a journey. It's a journey. Okay, so life is, pretty good. We're still having these underlying struggles, with not being able to have a baby, but, basically everything else is great. And so we were actually house sitting for some friends of ours, and Richard came over to me, and they had a pool, and so we were in the pool, and he came over and he said, I need to show you something. And he raised up his arm, and there was this huge knot under his arm. And I was like, what is that? And he said, I don't know. It just came up. And we both knew it was not good. So we both knew that that was something. And so he went to the doctor, and it was stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I can promise you the word cancer and Richard do not belong in the same sentence. And I remember thinking, oh, there's the other shoe, because life was really good. And I just kind of was waiting on the other shoe to fall. This is too good. Life is too good. And there was the other shoe. And so I was terrified, absolutely terrified. And I know that God can do anything, right? That's my heritage. That's my foundation. You pray, and you wait for the answer. But wow, that one was tough. He was 39, and we were way too young, I felt like, to be dealing with it. So I prayed, and I prayed, and I prayed. And I told So the doctors told us that if we wanted to have children, that we needed to freeze some sperm because this chemo was going to take that off the table. And I remember just being so overwhelmed with so many decisions that we had to make, and we just decided it wasn't going to happen. And I told the Lord, I said, if you will heal him, I will never ask you for anything else. And I'm in it. And it was a very long time before I realized that's not really how that works. And that's not what God wants us to do. And, but I did. I said, I will never ask you for anything else. And so we had that struggle with the chemo and the not knowing and the scans and the sickness. And we, you know, I say we because I think I cried more than he did, and I think I worried more than he did. He was tough, but I was not. And I remember one day I cried more when I wasn't with him. I think I worried more when I wasn't with him. And so I remember sitting at work one day, and this girl came in, and she, you know, we were in cubicles, so she couldn't see me. And I'd been crying that morning because of the unknown. And she had broken a fingernail or something coming in. And I remember thinking to myself, I wish that was my biggest problem today. I wish a broken fingernail was my biggest problem. So I did learn from that journey that people who make, or it was my observation that people make big things out of tiny things. They really don't have any problems. They don't have enough problems. Because if a broken fingernail can ruin your day, you don't have any problems. And so I did learn that. I did learn that when you have big problems, little problems are little. So that entire experience also changed my life, and it changed the way I looked at things. And now something can happen, and maybe the line is long at a store, and the cashier will say, "I'm sorry you had to wait," or whatever, and I'll say, I hope that's the worst thing that happens to me all day. And so all these years later, I still hopefully can put those things in perspective. And when something goes wrong, almost the first thing I think of is, can this be fixed? And is this something I can fix, or is this something God's going to need to fix? And so I put those in two categories. And so, well, maybe I can't fix anything, but you know what I'm saying. So Richard, so we went through all of that, and the chemo worked, and so God did hear my prayer on that one and answer my prayer. And so I did struggle for a long time about asking for anything else, because that was kind of what I made a deal. And I did. It was very, I think one of the turning points was reading that little book, The Prayer of Jabez. Kind of changed me about that, and I had to really pray about that, and people kind of helped me along the way to kind of regain that God does want us to constantly bring our needs before Him, and that's what that's what we should do. So I was so we'd kind of we'd given up on a family. I was trying to I want to say I don't know that I really gave up on that, because see, I know God can do anything. I went to tent revivals with my papaw. They had those big healing revivals, and I saw people getting healed. My entire life, I've seen miracle after miracle. I knew that nothing was too big for God. Nothing. And I knew He could do anything. And sometimes I'll say, there's faith that God's going to do something. But then or belief that He's going to do something. But when you know that He can do it, not just maybe, He can do it. You've seen it. And that's probably I don't have to have, I know He can. I'm not saying you don't have to have a belief, but you have this reassurance that you know He can. And He's done it for other people, and He could do it for me. And so I was getting ready to be 40. And I had spent 15 plus years wanting a baby and crying, and the desire was still there. I'd never left, not for one single minute. And I remember just, Richard and I had decided, so he had actually gone 5 years, and he was in remission. And so we decided to celebrate, and we took a trip to Hawaii. And we were gone for 3 weeks. And so we just enjoyed all the things. And I remember sitting on the beach on Waikiki Beach at sunset. It was just absolutely beautiful, glorious, everything you hope it will be. And we were just sitting there, and I was, I guess, being reflective and of all that we had been through, and happy at the way, God had healed Richard, and we were all happy. But I remember looking over at him, and I said, so is this it? Like, is this how we're going to spend the rest of our life? Just working and traveling and just me and you? Is this it? Is this all there is? Kind of looking back now, it seems weird. That seems weird, but it just felt like so long. Like the rest of my life felt really long. Not bad, just long. And I wasn't ungrateful. I don't want to say that in an ungrateful way. It just felt empty, I guess. It just felt empty. And so I feel like right in that time, this was in February, and I just felt like I raised my white flag. And I said, okay, it's done. I'm not going to cry about it anymore. I'm not going to pray about it anymore. Obviously, the answer is no. Sheila finally got the no. After all this time, I'm like, okay, people say God answers prayers, and he does. But sometimes that answer's no. And I had a really hard time with the no. Like, probably the worst of anybody he's ever known. Like, I could not take the no. And I just felt like, okay, we're done. And so I guess it was March, probably the very, very next month, we had a VBS staff meeting before we got ready for, to gear up for Bible school for the summer. So all the staff was at a meeting, and Brother Mike Vickers got up to speak. And the very first sentence, I'm sure, out of his mouth was, "It's never too late to be what you've always wanted to be." And I'm sitting there like, looking around. And I knew he was talking to me. I felt like God was just talking to me. And I'm like, what? I honestly was so confused. I was very, very confused, like, for real. And I wrote that down. And I don't even know what he said the rest of the time. I was like, it's never too late to be what you've always wanted to be. Even now, sometimes I probably should talk to him about that. Like, what was that? What were you talking about there? What was the rest of what you said? And so I went to work, and I wrote that down on like a Post-it note, and I put it on my computer monitor. And I just looked at it all day long. And I felt like God was speaking to me. I had no clue, like no clue. And I was like, but I didn't cry about it. I didn't pray about it. I didn't worry about it. I thought, okay, you like what they say, you do you, whatever. I don't even know what that means. But I knew that God had spoken to me, but I didn't know what it meant. And so that was like probably end of March, for someone in March. And so Mother's Day rolls around. I'm still not going to church on Mother's Day. And we took his mom out for breakfast before church, and we took her to Meadowview for breakfast. And so after that was over, we went out to Warriors Path Park, and we just went for a walk, just trying to get through the day. I was just trying to get through the day. We'd celebrate with my mom the night before. I just want to get through the day. That's all I wanted to do. And so we walked, and then we came back by, and there was, these newspapers out, outside the grocery store. And so we were driving, and I told Richard, why don't we stop and get a paper? We never saw the paper, never. And so we went home, and we sat on the front porch, and I opened the newspaper, and just in the front page, just like right on the front page, there was this little tiny ad about an adoption agency was coming to Kingsport to talk about adopting Chinese orphans. And I just looked at that, and I read it to Richard, and he said, well, let's go hear what they have to say. I was like, okay. We never talked about it. We didn't research the agency. We didn't talk about adoption. We had never talked about adoption, like never. We certainly hadn't talked about international adoption, never. And so the meeting was the next Saturday, and we didn't talk about it all week. We didn't research anything. We didn't do anything. Didn't tell anybody we were going, nothing. So we were driving to the meeting, and I'm just going to say this so you can know I knew nothing, like so nothing. I looked at Richard and I said, what do Chinese people even look like? So, I mean, I knew nothing about what we were doing. And so we go in, and it was at a church and like in their fellowship hall, and we sat in the front at the table, which I never sit in the front at anything. And the room was full of people who are now our friends, but didn't know. We didn't even know what we were doing there, seriously. And so the guy that is the founder, it's a Living Hope Adoption Agency. He's actually Chinese. He was born in China. He was actually a slave in China, and he had some missionaries had came to where he was and told him about the Lord, and he found his way to the United States, and he had pledged his life to saving Chinese orphans, and it's exactly what he's done. And so we're sitting there, and he's telling his story, and I'm just, just there for information. I mean, I don't even know what I'm doing there, honestly. So the more he talks, I'm just all in. Like, I'm really into this story about, I didn't even know there was a situation in China with orphans. I didn't know anything. But I can tell you, as I was sitting there, every single thing that had ever happened to me in my life came into focus. It was so supernatural. I saw this big puzzle above my head, and all these pieces were just coming together. And I knew that that's what God had for me. With everything in my soul, I knew that everything that ever happened to me had brought me to this building, this chair, sitting in front of this man. Every single thing that had happened to me had brought me right here. And God, I knew that's what God had for me. 100,000%. No one could have ever convinced me that that was not what He had for me. And so the meeting, I was like deliriously happy. Like, I had an answer. Like, I knew the answer. This is what it was after all this time. And I was just so beyond happy. And so after the meeting, we all talked, and I could have gotten on a plane. I could have walked out that door and got on a plane right then. Like, there was no discussion for me. And so we get in the car on the way home, and I realize, I'm married to Richard Lane, and he is the least spontaneous person you will ever meet. He has to research everything. He just does not do things quickly or on a whim or anything. And I was just sitting there thinking, I'm never going to be able to talk him into this. Like, never. And so, I didn't want to hear the no. I didn't want to hear the no. So we just drove in silence for probably about 10 minutes. I was so happy, and I knew he was going to say no. And I was like, this is going to be bad. And so finally I said, well, what did you think? And he said, I think it sounds like something we need to do. And so we never looked back. We started the home study, and we started all of our paperwork, and all of that was just, it takes months to do that. And our paperwork was turned in on December 2nd. Of that year. Your dossier is turned in, and then you just wait. And they had told us at the time it might be about 18 months before we were matched to a baby. And some of the other people that we now knew, the people that were in the meeting, and this community of people that adopted from China, we were learning about them. And so people were kind of whining about, or I don't know if whining is the word, but talking about how long the wait was going to be. 18 months? That's not a wait. I've been waiting 15 years. I was like, and then I would joke around. I'd tell people, well, it takes 9 months if you have your own, so it's just a few more months after that. So anyway, so that was on December 2nd when we finally got our paperwork done. And so we didn't know when the wait, we didn't know how long it was going to take. And I remember coming home from work on, or New Year's Eve. I was coming home on New Year's Eve, and the sky was completely pink. The sky was completely pink. And I went in the house and I told Richard, I was like, you got to come out here. I said, look at this sky. I've never seen the sky this pink. The whole sky was pink. And so I just remembered that, just thinking, was God telling us something, or was it, I didn't know. But I do know it was significant, and I remembered the day, and I remembered it. And so we were matched with Jada October 13th, so we didn't have to wait a whole year. And so we traveled on Thanksgiving Day, we left, and we actually met her on December 2nd. So it was exactly 1 year to the day. So we actually met Jada and got Jada on December 2nd. And we celebrate what we call Gotcha Day. And sometimes people don't understand what that is, but it's just a term for the day we got you. And so so her Gotcha Day is December 2nd. But I will say her birthday is January 1st. So that pink sky that I saw the year before was actually the night that she was born. And so that was just a beautiful thing. So we're in China, and we are in this big hotel room, or a hotel lobby or area. And so we had about maybe 13 people in our travel group, 13 other families in our travel group. And so they bring all these babies out, and they're all sort of lined up, and I don't know which one's mine. I'm looking at all of them trying to figure out which one's Jada. And she has on a yellow coat, but her favorite color is yellow. And so, but anyway, so they call her, we're somewhere in the middle of the pack, and so they call her Chinese name, and we go up and get her, and I got her first. Richard and I debated about who would get to hold her first, but of course it was me. And so I remember when they handed her to me, I just remember just being overwhelmed with, this one is mine. I'd loved a lot of kids, and I'm so grateful for all the people that shared their children with me. But this one was mine. And oh my goodness. And so we, we're down in the area, and all the people are getting their children. And so it was a little while before we got back up to the room, the hotel room. And I could just remember just holding her and crying. Because while all this time that I thought the miracle was for me, and all this was for me to get a baby, the realization that the miracle was actually for Jada. It really didn't have a whole lot to do with me. I was just the byproduct. I was the vessel to save her. And so I can just remember crying over that. The realization that the miracle was for her. And I looked at Richard and I said, what would have happened to her if we hadn't done what God told us to do? And I can still cry 20 years later about that moment, because that was the plan all along. My 15 years of waiting had to happen for me to have her. And if the timing hadn't been exactly right, then we had to be matched, because she was definitely meant to be mine. She was meant to be mine. And I'm going to say I spent all those years feeling inadequate and feeling like there was something wrong with me, or dealing with that rejection, or other people were better than me, or more holy than me, or more blessed than me. And I can say when I got Jada, I was like, oh, I don't want to mess this up. I felt immediately like, oh my gosh, she's so amazing, and I just don't want to mess it up. And so I just remember just that whole time that we were in China, just feeling the presence of the Lord, and just understanding to be the hands and feet. And I can honestly say I've never felt anything more spiritual than what we did. And just walking alongside of the Lord in something that I know was the will of God. It was a beautiful thing, and it still is. The wonder of that has never been lost on me for a single minute. And that He trusted me with this amazing person. It just, I said, we can say, I waited for 15 years. And we say that in a sentence so easy. We say it so easy. And that she's the answer to my prayer for 15 years. But I don't ever want to forget the lessons that I learned in those 15 years. And just that, how important it is to have a foundation and to be able to pray and to know that He is the only hope. He's the only hope. Like there's nothing else. And just to stay rooted in the things that I've learned and the foundation that I had, and to just know that God had a plan for my life. Even though I certainly could never have imagined. I could never have imagined that this would be the plan. And so, Jada, we came back, and of course we were still teaching our 3rd and 4th graders, on Wednesday night, and we kept them up to date, and the whole journey. They went with us through the whole thing, and so they were definitely emotionally invested in this baby, and she definitely was a church baby. Everybody loved her, and all the kids, just so invested in her, and she was everything. She was everything we wanted, and a whole bunch more. And we often say she was born to be apostolic, because one of the first things she did, people would say, "Praise the Lord," and she'd throw her little hands up, and everywhere we went, no matter where we went, people knew, and she had all these little tricks that she did, but people would say, "Praise the Lord," everywhere, and people knew she would do it. I always thought it was not just in church, but everywhere, and she would always throw her hands up. But she was everything we wanted and more, and we were so incredibly happy, and just, we were just praying. We initially, knew I wanted a big family. I should say that. I thought I would have 6 kids. I wanted a big family. And so we did want a sister for Jada, and probably just to take the heat off her, but no, we wanted a sister for Jada, and I knew that I could make that happen. I knew the process now, and I knew that all I had to do was fill out the paperwork and turn it in, and we would be matched. But I wanted that same experience with the next baby. I wanted to know that that's what God had for me. And I wanted to know that's what He had for our family. And then I also knew that the timing had to be perfect for me to get the baby that I was meant to have. And so I had all those realizations kind of at the same time. And in China at the time, it may be different now, but you had to wait a year before you could turn your paperwork in for your next baby. And so we had passed that time, and we just didn't feel like that God was giving us a yes. We just didn't feel like we were getting a yes again. But it wasn't the desperation. We just were waiting for the yes. Or if it was a no, I think I was okay with that too. At this time, I was deliriously happy, and I could have lived the rest of my life just like that. And so we were praying about it, and I had some people at church were praying about it, and Jonathan Lovelace was preaching that night, and I don't know that I was looking for a sign. I was just looking for a yes somewhere. And I remember when Jonathan was praying over the scripture, before he started preaching and before the title was up on the screen, I was just like, God, just a word, just something. I just need to know when your timing is right. And so we were getting ready to sit down, and they flashed on the screen. The title of his message was, "There's a Baby on the Way." And some of my friends that were praying with me, they just turned around, and I was like, we turned in our paperwork the next day. We had it ready, and we turned in our paperwork the next day. We were ready. And so fast forward, I guess, we waited a little over a year for Ruby. And we got her in September of 2006. And I said, we've often said, if Jada's sunshine, she's fire. And we got our precious Ruby, and she is perfect. She is perfect. She's a little fireball, but she's perfect. And so our life was complete. We had our 2 babies, and we were perfectly fine. We had actually, at one time, we thought we were going to do it again, and then they changed some rules or requirements in China and age requirements, and Richard and I were already too old. And so we were happy, though, nothing, it was all good. And so we, a few years later, I think the kids had kind of the girls started asking about a baby. And we're like, nope, we're done, no more. And so we got Ruby in 2006, and in 2014, the girls were really, really, really begging for a sibling. And I said no. I said, if God puts a baby out on our front porch, maybe we'll talk about keeping it. And so I knew that wasn't going to happen. We live off the road, and nobody was going to do that. And so we had, met actually, this was a lady that was in our travel group for Ruby, and she'd gone back into China in her church, and they had done a bunch of mission work into China, and she had a lot of friends that worked those orphanages, and so she was always talking to them, and she knew we were done with children, and she knew better than to. I was like, don't send me anything about anybody needing to adopt a baby. But anyway, she sent me a picture of a little 4-year-old boy, and the only thing in the title of her email was, "Is he yours?" And he was the cutest little 4-year-old boy I have ever seen in my life. And I'm going to back up just a little bit right here. When Ruby was 4, and now this was in, 2010? 2009. So she was 4 years old, and we were not adopting again. We were done. Our family was done. And I remember this season of time where I would hold Ruby. I would be holding her, and I would just cry over her. And I would think to myself, one, I didn't understand why I was crying over it, but I would say, someone would think that she's too old. Someone would think that this baby is too old to be adopted. And I remember just crying about that, because she's not too old. And plenty of older children need to be adopted. But I didn't understand why I was crying about that. It didn't make sense to me why I felt that burden. I didn't know. And so I probably did that for a couple of months, just holding her and just crying. And I was just in my head all the time, somebody would think she's too old. And she's just a baby. And so I now know, of course, as God always prepares our hearts for the next thing. Owen was 4. He was 4.5 when we saw his picture. So I knew he was still young enough to be a Lane. I could still make him a Lane. And sometimes I look at his picture and I think, well, what was I thinking? But because how did I think that would work? How did I think that would go? But my prayer for him was that he would love me like nothing that made sense, and that he would let me be his mom. And he did. And so we prayed about Owen, and I can honestly say adoption in the beginning was not on my radar, and I can promise you, adopting an older child, it's a different story, it's a different thing, and that certainly was not on my radar. But I knew that God had prepared our hearts for that and our families for that. And so we've had Owen now 8 years. and he's getting ready to be 14. And so that's our story. That's God's story. And sometimes people will say, when we were adopting Owen, we were well in our, let's see, I was 52 when we got Owen, so that put Richard at 57, adopting well, he was 5 by the time we got him. And people would say, we would tell people we were adopting again, and people would say, don't you know how old you are? People said, I mean, it was very common. That was a very common thread when we were adopting him. And I would just confidently say, sometimes I would be a little sassy about it, and I'd say, well, if you've got a problem with how old I am, I'm not the person you need to be talking to. You need to be talking to God about that, because this is not my story. This is his story. And I felt that way with all my children. I was 41 when we got Jada. And so sometimes I talk, people say I'm too old or too old to start a family. And I'm like, no, if God's in it, you're not too old. And Jada just turned 20, and Ruby's getting ready to graduate from high school, and Owen's going into high school. And so if God's in it, you can't worry about the rest. But I'll say that this is his story. This is nothing like I could have imagined, and it's better than anything that I could have dreamed of. And so that's God's story. So my greatest female influence. Let me just start by saying I've had so many. I have been blessed with beautiful aunts, just so many Sunday school teachers and people in my life that have just been true to what they say they are. And I've had so many amazing female influences in my life, strong, beautiful women. And my mother, oh my goodness, she's, she just was a prayer warrior, and she just supported me and loved me no matter what, even in the ugly times or bad times or whatever. She was amazing. But I'm gonna have to go with my Mama Benton. She was something. And I'm sort of in grandchildren-wise, I'm down near the bottom of the pack. She had lots of grandchildren. And she still made a way to make me feel special. And I watched her a lot. And she wasn't preachy, she just loved people. She just loved people. She was funny, and she was a hard worker, and she just loved the Lord with all her heart. And she was just so good. And I was very, very blessed to have her as a grandmother. And I can remember Mama coming at me about something, and I was just a little girl. And Mama was standing there with her hands out, and she was, run. And I thought, if I could just get to Mama, I've got it made. And I made it. And but she was always, one of my biggest fans. And I just loved her so much. But the walk that she had was real. It was real. And I say this all the time. People are just looking for something real. Even if it's, no matter what, they just want something that's real. And she was real. And I had a lot of people in my life that were real. And she was the leader of the pack. And she was just a beautiful, beautiful soul. And she loved the Lord, and everybody else. She loved everybody. And so she is definitely a role model for me, and someone that I would love to pattern my life after. And I remember my mama, she used to sing this song, Working the Road. And the chorus went, working the road, helping the weak and blind. And I want to smooth out the road that leads to heaven above and make it easy for those behind. And I feel like she did that. She did. She showed us the way. She showed us the road and how to work it. My advice would be to fall in love with Jesus. Just just to fall in love with His Word, His ways. And I would say everything that happens, to try to find like a reason or a lesson. What is it that I'm supposed to be learning? What is it you're trying to tell me? Instead of just looking at it as like on face value, like this is a problem that I need to solve. To just continually search for that lesson. What am I supposed to learn? Because it's a journey. The whole thing is a spiritual journey to get us, I might be wise today, but I promise you I'm not really even all that wise, but I wasn't, you know what I'm saying? I wasn't wise, and there's lessons to be learned and a path to take and people to help along the way. And I think there's always ways that you can find to help other people. And then I would say to always be open to whatever God has for you. And that certainly was a lesson that took me a very long time to learn. But I think, to just be willing to say yes. And like I said, I've thought many times about my children, where would they be and what would have happened if we hadn't said yes. So I think being open to a yes, even when it's unfamiliar and not anything that you imagined that it would be, but I think just saying that yes, and to step into or lean into what God is telling you, because I do feel like there's a plan or for your life, and to step into that and lean into that, even if maybe that's not something you want to do, but if you feel like that's where God's leading you, to definitely lean into that. Maybe step out of the boat. I say that a lot. It's easy to stay safe and stay in the boat, but God, I feel like, is always calling us to step out of the boat, and that's where it's scary and where you just have to trust in Him. No matter what people think or say, that you just need to look at Jesus. Step out of the boat. Only focus on Him. And let the rest of it just, let the waves go where they will. But you stay focused on what's important, and that is pleasing the Lord, and that is living for Him. And I'm going to leave with one last scripture, which is Romans 12:12, and this just sums it all up for me. Romans 12:12 says, rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, and be constant in prayer. And if you can do those three things, you got it.